Hi, I'm Ezra Boggs, and even Christians watch The Atheist Edge.
We're ready. Hello, my name is James Walker, and I'm the president of Watchman Fellowship, an evangelical Christian organization that does apologetics. But I'm also the co-founder of the Atheist Christian Book Club. That's what we're doing today. And our other co-host, the co-founder, Bill Cluck, is out of town right now. So filling in for us, we have Jim Hall. Jim is on loan from Atheist Edge video podcast, and you've been a long-time club member now. Jim, you realize
charter member.
This is 1 year. This makes 1 year.
Is that right?
It's the anniversary.
Okay.
And so right. You've been here, does it seem like a year?
I didn't even realize that, but the Atheist Edge, my YouTube podcast, is a year old on April 23rd.
There you go.
I didn't realize they came up that quick. Okay.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, it's great to be here.
It's been an exciting year.
Hope I can fill Bill's shoes. I'm not as candid and animated as he is, but I'll do my best.
Well, I know we're going to have a good time, and we're excited about some things, some opportunities that we have on this. And so, if we also have a YouTube live audience, and we wanted to also kind of reset with them a little bit. Can you just, for all of us, and we have some new people here as well in the room with us today at the club, can you tell us what's the club all about, and what are our goals? What are we trying to do?
Here's what I think a good sizable chunk of people that come here expect is a lot of people, especially the atheists, come here originally looking to get in a fight. They're looking to debate. They're looking to win an argument. A lot of them do. A lot of the Christians, maybe for the same reason, or they had the Great Commission from God, they're coming here for the sole purpose of winning souls for Jesus. And I think, now that never changes, I know I know that, we're all here for some spirited debate still, but then after about 1 or 2 times, maybe 3 times of coming to a setting like this, you see that there's a richer and fuller meaning for being here, and we realize we're all on the same team, that we're all sincerely seeking truths, and that's more important. And who would have thought that we can build some great friendships here too?
That's true, and it's like we are on the opposite sides. I'm Christian, you're atheist. We could go through the whole room and kind of divide up about 50-50. But the cool thing about it is we kind of all agree this is the issue. This is one of the key questions of life, and this is something that we can agree to disagree on, and we can learn from each other. I think I've learned over this last year, learned a couple of things.
Yes.
And so I think this club helps me to become a better thinker. I sometimes say that all of my ideas sound brilliant in church, but then when I get out with some of you guys, then I realize some of my ideas may be better than others, and so this helps me improve my thinking, I hope, and that's one of my goals at least.
My mind has been changed over a dozen times. I mean, a complete 180 on certain topics here.
Well, our book for today, we're going to be looking at Francis Collins, and this is going to be controversial for the Christians. Now, kind of setting the stage back a little bit. In our last book club, we dealt with the book Free Will by Sam Harris, the last actual club book meeting that we did. And I was wanting that book as a Christian. For one thing, I'm fascinated with the topic. Is free will an illusion, or is there really free will? But I also had a feeling it might divide the atheist about down the middle on that.
Sure did.
So, and it probably did. We had probably more atheists arguing our position than Christians.
It was your old chance to sit back and just watch us fight each other.
Well, it wasn't a fight, though. It wasn't a fight. It was a good discussion.
But I think the favor is going to be returned tonight.
Well, our co-founder, our atheist co-founder, Bill Cluck, has been pushing for this almost since day one. He wanted to do a book that was very meaningful to him when he read it as an atheist. He's a former Christian, but it's The Language of God by Francis Collins. Francis Collins was the head of the Human Genome Project. He's a geneticist. He's a nationally acclaimed scientist. He definitely has credentials, but he's also a very devout Christian and very much a believer and a defender of classical evolutionary models. And so the question is, how are Christians going to respond to this as a scientist? His argument that yes, there is a God, but I do believe that evolution is true. And then I'm kind of curious how the atheists would respond to that as well, coming from a Christian.
It's going to be good. The Atheist Christian Book Club also has a Facebook page, and you saw that a couple of the members have already posted lengthy notes on the book. So there's a lot
like
of discussion topics already.
I like that. And I know, Jim, you posted some observations, and who else?
Parker?
Kevin.
My dad.
Kevin.
Yeah, Kevin.
He'll be here.
He'll be here? Okay. So, and we want to be able to address some of those questions. You just get a feel. How many of you got to read the book, got to finish the book? Okay. Most of us. That's excellent. Did any of you get to watch that 92-minute video that I sent? Was that?
A little bit.
A little bit of it? Okay, that might have been helpful. I'm not sure. When I read the book, first of all, I think you made the same observation. I was thinking, oh, this is going to be a tough one. You have a human genome project to wade through all of the, RNA, DNA, and protein molecules, but it really was very readable. And he didn't get into the technical language. He made it, and the first couple of chapters really reminded me a lot of the book clubs we've had in the previous months, talking about cosmology, talking about the anthropic principle.
But written in lay terms.
Very easy.
Surprising.
Terms. Yes.
I was expecting like a Hawking Brief History of Time.
Yes.
Have you ever tried to read that?
No.
Oh, yeah, it's dry.
But it was remarkably easy to read and or listen to if you have the audio book on that. So does anybody have any kind of general observations or things what leapt off the page at you when you read the book?
One thing that I thought was interesting, so I thought I knew a little bit about Collins' journey, just from what I've heard from other books and people who have quoted him and referenced him as a Christian scientist, but it really was not. He brought up some things in the scientific realm that he thought suggested a creator God. But the big thing that he talked about, he started in chapter 1 and kind of brought it back in at the end of the book, was he was really into this idea of the moral law. The idea that there is something about humanity that drives us to a higher standard of behavior. And he did not think that evolution had an explanation for that. And he felt like that could only be explained by a God. I don't think he ever specified the Christian God specifically had to be that, but he pointed that as a big indicator of a reason for his theism. So I thought...
a quote that ties into that he said in the book is, understanding right and wrong is a universal feature of humanity. He goes on to say, if evolutionary pressure drives human morality, the absolute morality proponents are in big trouble.
Yeah. Disagree?
Personally?
Yeah.
Let's not start with me. It's really detailed. I've got a very, very narrow view of I'm an absolutist. I'm an objectivist as far as morality, but my definition of morality is so narrow that it doesn't involve 6 words: right, wrong, good, evil, should, and ought.
Yeah.
So if you take those out of it, I know. Let's not start with me.
Yeah, it's hard to even read a dictionary definition without
adding a should.
Those words.
Yeah, you almost need them.
Yeah. So I do think one of the differences, I don't know if you were headed there or not, but this morality thing is that the Christian concept it's different than the Eastern concept, which is another spiritual view. For example, like in Buddhism or maybe some forms of Hinduism, where you have this idea of karma. That there's no personal being that you're offending. There's a simple cause and effect. If you do this, then this happens. You don't want this to happen, you don't do that. With Christianity, though, there's a sense that not only did I do something inappropriate, I have damaged a relationship with a person because of this. And I think that is kind of adds to this idea of morality in a sense that it goes beyond just a mechanistic cause and effect. I plugged in the plug and got shocked because I did it wrong, versus I offended a person, and there's a relationship now that needs to be mended, that needs to be fixed.
Well, one of the things that Collins brought up as a reason why he did not think that evolution could explain this kind of morality was he brought up the idea of altruism, and not just altruism like doing something in public, doing something a grandiose gesture. He thought that this moral law compelled people to either A, do good in secret where no one can see it, or B, even go so far as to help a potential enemy, which perhaps, according to him, in evolutionary terms, would actually be a potential detriment towards passing on your genes or whatever he thinks evolution points towards.
Did you touch on, that there may be some benefit if you stop looking at just the individual and look at the tribe or look at the culture? So maybe, yes, it doesn't help this individual, but maybe that there's some Darwinian pressure when you look at helping the group as a whole or the culture as a whole.
I thought he was a little bit too quick to dismiss that. He kind of put it in terms of, he used the example, and I've never heard a atheist use this example. He says he's heard it from other biologists of ants, and there's certain types of ants that are drones and they're sterile and they cannot pass on the genetic information, but they still work towards the benefit of the colony. And he kind of dismissed that as because, well, since they are sterile, they can't have that passing on of the genes as an appease towards their behavior. But I think that may be true for those ants, but that fails to take into account for human society. We don't have just genes to pass on, we have culture to pass on, we have civilization to keep going. And I think that a lot of the altruistic behavior that he doesn't think that evolution can explain, I think can be explained as something that humankind as a whole has figured out that, okay, civilization works if we all work together. We're not all trying to murder each other. We're not all trying to steal from each other. Barbarians don't build spaceships. We have to have some kind of system for getting along in order for everyone to do better.
And one of the examples, I think that, I don't remember if this was in the video or the book, that he used in referring to altruism was there was a black man who had jumped on the train tracks to rescue a guy having a epileptic episode, a white guy. And I don't know why race was part of it necessarily, but he said you have two cultures, two people that never see each other other than maybe passing by, getting on the train on their way home from work. So this guy has a seizure, falls onto the tracks, and within about 3 seconds before the train actually got there, the other guy jumps in, grabs him, and they fit into this tiny little space on the side. And so his questioning was, why would that guy do that? Right? That there was no benefit to him. I mean, it didn't better his life to almost get crushed by a train to save someone. So what was the purpose? So that was one of the ones he talked. I think that was in the video, where he talked about the struggle of how do you explain that?
How would you
I explain
Yeah.
that?
It just dawned on me, Chris and I, are there any other non-believers here besides Chris and I? Oh, okay, yeah, that's right. Okay, all right, so speak up, guys. There's only 4 of us.
I don't know, it's an interesting question. Because, I mean, the example, we don't know if the guy was a Christian. We don't know any of that. So in terms of...
If you limit, I think which was Chris was talking about, if you limit Darwinianism and talk about just survival to be able to reproduce your DNA, the dominant gene passed on to next generation, propagate DNA, there's a lot of things that a lot of the culture looks at today as being either beneficial or at least neutral, that much of the culture, maybe Christians agree with it or not, but it doesn't help propagate DNA. I mean, population control. You're not propagating DNA. Abortion. That kind of goes in the face against, that's kind of the opposite of propagating DNA, isn't it? So, but we would look at that as morality being a different question than is it beneficial to Darwinianism or to propagating DNA.
To Chris's point that barbarians don't build spaceships, that's where I always have trouble with evolution. I mean, the religious aspect apart, right? I don't see the evolutionary imperative to write a symphony or build a spaceship or do a lot of things that people do that have great meaning to us, but there's really no survival driven reason to do a lot of these things, right? And I struggle with that a lot. Whether you believe in God or not, I have trouble understanding where that comes from. Right?
Well, aesthetics could maybe just be a byproduct, because there's lateral drift in evolution. There's some things that just carry over. Or just based on the fact that once we came down out of the trees and we became self-aware, one of the only species of animal on Earth that's aware of our own mortality. That right there does a lot. And that's, me personally, that's where I think religion is needed. Especially, there are...
Can you say that again?
Religion is needed. It's true.
Whoa!
It's true. It's needed. There are a substantial percentage of people on the planet that, without religion, they would fall into a depression. Because there is a need for comfort. And some people, and I'm not saying it's you guys, but some people, that's their only source of comfort. Without it, they would be lost.
Why should they need that?
Not
Safety
not
net.
so much a crutch. It's
Make you feel better
comfort,
to know
like
there's something there.
a blanket, a warm blanket.
Warm blanket.
Not a crutch, a warm blanket.
Some people would say, well, why do people need that, though? I mean, if you're thirsty, it's because water exists. If you're hungry, it's because food
Well, we
exists.
became sentient. We have a prefrontal lobe that's just out of control. It takes 1/3 of all the food you eat just to power this thing up here, you know?
So it's just an unhappy accident, maybe, that
we
are
became aware
worried
of
about death?
We're aware of our own mortality. If a dog was aware of its mortality and became sentient, it would need religion. You know, we're not the only animals. Who's the gorilla that can speak like 200? Coco. Yeah, she could tell jokes, and she knew she was going to die, and it made her sad. I don't know if she ever found God, but
Thanks a lot, whoever taught me to speak. Right?
I think what Francis Collins would say is that he has that section towards the end, I think next to the last chapter, where he talks about that one of the Christian resistance he's seen is that there's usually the idea that evolution is totally random, and so you could end up with no life. You could end up with, you know, there's no design to it whatsoever, no purpose to it whatsoever. It just happened to be this way. Where I think what he would say is that he believes that God can, he could make a million special acts of creation, or he can just do one, and he's powerful enough to know every possible outcome, that one big bang, and he knows where every molecule of dust is going to be on every planet, on every galaxy, and exactly when abiogenesis begins the process of life, how random mutation given time is going to end up with exactly what he is going to want it to be.
I'm interested. Are there any believers in the room that are adhere to natural selection as it's written in the science books?
Evolution, macroevolution.
Right, macroevolution.
Yes, but
why
I don't
is
believe
that split
single
right
cell
down?
I don't believe single cell to life as it is.
No, not
today.
abiogenesis. I'm talking about speciation.
I think what Conrad's saying is he doesn't believe that you can get from amoeba to human.
Yeah, let's not go back that far. Let's just talk about speciation. Species can evolve into different species.
Yes, I think that. I'm
Oh.
no expert on the topic, but I think
Okay.
that, yeah.
I want wings, man.
Give it a few billion years. And,
You know how big we're
Where are
big
they
boys.
at?
You know how big our wings would have to be to support our weight in flight? We'd be. That's some big old wings.
All your bones have to be hollow too, which is a downside.
How big, Jim?
I don't know. You could write it out though. Some big old wings. But yeah.
We do have a Facebook question.
Okay, we have somebody from Facebook Live and has a question for us. And
All right, so John says, if humans have some common innate sense of morality, how would theists explain the facts that 1. Human moral beliefs and behaviors differ so widely, 2. Human moral beliefs and behaviors are so linked to culture, and 3. Even Christians cannot agree on how to define moral behavior?
So if it's so well defined, why do you get tribal pockets that all have different views of what that perfect morality is, right?
Yeah.
Is that what he's saying? Yeah.
Yeah, because morals and behaviors differ.
Who wants to field that one?
I'll try to get this conversation going anyway. It's a 3-part question, so I don't remember which part this was, but I think that the phenomena that there is a pretty universal idea in virtually every culture that something's right, something's wrong. And you appeal to it as everybody ought to know that. Now, it's true, the caller, John, is right about this, that oftentimes that we have a different set of rules. You know, we have different different rules for the game. You know, was that legal or illegal? We argue about that. But the idea that there's just try going to the restaurant and they tell you it's a 1 hour wait and say, no, I'll just be seated next, thank you. Everybody else turns around, no, you're wrong. Well, where's this written down? I don't see, it's not even in the Texas state legislature. I mean, where's this coming from? It's this idea that there's a right and wrong. And maybe the fact that there's not a universal agreement on what constitutes that right and wrong could be part of the fall. That could be the damage that was done from the fact that we are sinners, that we don't have a really accurate view, a clear view of the right and wrong that we would have had if we weren't fallen creatures.
Women have only been able to vote in this country maybe, what, about a century?
And you go back a century and it was considered immoral for women to vote.
So there was a shift, right?
Yeah.
Don't you have to have some sort of expectations to manage a society, to have a functioning society? You have to drive on the right side or the left. You have to agree on something. So if waiting in line is what people agree on and somebody butts in line, well then, yeah, it's going to be chaos. And do we want to live in a society that breeds on chaos? I mean, I think most of us don't. So wouldn't it be natural for us to agree on certain ways to keep order in society so that we all can benefit?
But yet there's people who will cut in line.
Right,
So
and we get mad at them. Right?
And they pay an immediate,
Yeah,
they pay an immediate penalty.
Yeah.
Those are the atheists.
Well, I'm just saying there's a lot of variation among our moral senses, right?
Kidding.
The whole morality issue, I'm not saying it's a horse that we've beaten to death in past book clubs, but there's a lot to get to in the book. And if we could very easily stick to the same topic for 2 hours. But I propose that maybe we move on. I don't know.
Well, one last thing before we move
sure.
on. But Romans chapter 2 talks about this. I gotta take these off. But Romans chapter 2 talks about this universal sense of morality that we all have, that God has placed in our hearts, that we know that, like, torturing babies for fun is wrong. So I think that kind of answers one of those three aspects of this question. So God has written a basic morality on our hearts so that we do know, but I think that probably answers this question pretty well.
Me torturing babies for fun, and I that's an often used, very extreme example, is wrong, but not for the same reason. That which increases well-being while simultaneously decreases suffering. That's my definition of morality. Torturing babies for fun just happens to fall into increasing suffering and decreasing well-being.
Not for the torturer.
Overall well-being in the big picture.
You do a poll?
And we can do it, yeah, in a way. In a way, you can look at the society as a whole. We talked about what's good for the society. Some species of not just advanced mammals, but even birds. There are birds, the alpha in the tribe is brightly colored. The males are always prettier than the females in every species. I'm just joking. But no, I'm just. The brightly colored alpha will sit at the top of the tree and put himself in harm's way, protecting the rest of that flock or whatever birds for that flock. He puts himself in danger, and that is not a survival advantage. He's doing that. I'm going on a big tangent. There is no true altruism. Like when he was talking about the guy that saved the dude. Mm-hmm. Even if you give a anonymous donation and no one, you're still making yourself feel better. There's no such thing as actual 100% pure altruism. You're getting a benefit one way or the other.
So the guy jumping on train tracks, though, to save a guy,
he becomes a hero.
Doing it to make himself be a hero?
I hate to say it. I know it sounds counterintuitive.
You have time to think, oh, if I do this, I'll be a hero.
First off, it's a male urge to protect all of us. Conrad, when you go to a restaurant, do you just automatically sit with your back to the wall and a clear view of all the exits?
Actually, I do.
Which male in here does not? Raise your hand if you don't and you're male. See? Some things are hardwired.
So I read a story about 10 years ago. There was an ape or chimpanzee in Washaway. This was back in the 70s. I read the book 10 years ago. But there was a colony of apes, University of Oklahoma. They had a moat and they had an island and a river, and they kept these apes on the island. Well, a newcomer ape fell in the water and was floundering, and one of the established apes that had never met this female ape before that was floundering in the water. They were struggling to stay above water. He jumped in and grabbed the ape and pulled her out to safety. A complete stranger to him, and yet he did this seemingly altruistic act. So I wonder, Collins talks about something that may have happened in human history 100,000 years ago or so, where God imbued humans with a spiritual outlook or ability to conduct altruistic acts. I wonder what he would think about a story like that. If it exists in the animal world, does he have to push that back farther, and how far would he push that back?
Would that be an anomaly, or is that typical animal behavior?
Well, I think it's even an anomaly in humans to do something, like he said, that's truly altruistic. I mean, we don't often put ourselves in harm's way for a stranger, though we sometimes do. I think some of it could be related to, we do have instincts to care for those around us, especially that are related to us, and that instinct can sometimes expand beyond that immediate circle. Just like you think of an adoptive parent, well, every mother has a biological imperative to care for their biological offspring, but that can be displaced onto an adoptive child as well, and that those same instincts can apply. In the same way, even though evolution may have designed us to care mostly about the people that are closely related to us, that could benefit, that the genes could, because we share genes with them, that could be also transferred to others outside of the immediate circle. So it wasn't necessarily a design of evolution to work that way. It's just kind of a happy accident.
Could I suggest an Occam's razor here? I mean, is it easier to believe that God gave us a moral sense, or is it easier to believe that this really complex set of behaviors kind of just somehow developed for the good of society?
Well, I mean,
I think sometimes the reality is complex.
Yeah. Well, think of a dog that's eating a bone. The dog that's eating a bone, another dog comes and tries to steal it. That first dog's going to growl. It's there's built-in evolutionary morals. I don't know if you could call them moral sense in the dog, but we recognize the same sorts of reactions when, if somebody were to try to sleep with my wife, I would have a particular reaction. It was to say that couldn't have come about through some evolutionary mechanism. Yeah. I mean, if that can't come about through some evolutionary mechanism, then nothing else could have either, because that's very beneficial to survival of my genes going forward.
Just to address what Conrad said for just a second, part of what I kind of way I view on those kind of questions like that is we don't realize how much our worldview dictates how we're going to think is the simplest explanation for something. Mm-hmm. And so for a Christian, when you already believe in God, and in fact some of our authors, Christian authors, have said it's totally, I remember one of the videos we watched where William Lane Craig said something along these lines. If it's possible that God exists, then yes, this is a highly probable explanation for what happened. But if you start with the premise that you're almost certain there is no God, then the simplest explanation to Conrad becomes a very complicated chain of events that has to happen for the atheist to look at. Does that make sense? We have this bias. We have this confirmation bias.
And we're trying to work backwards.
We're trying to.
Yeah, there's an assumption that you can pull this God thing off the shelf as if it existed on the shelf. Well, what if it doesn't exist on the shelf to pull out and explain that? Well, then you have to find some other explanation.
The hard thing for us to do in the room is to try to think like the other worldview and say, okay, if there's no God, let me get that in my mind right now, then would that explain this, this, and this? And you try to say, is it logically consistent with those givens? That we all have a different set of givens with our worldview.
That'd be a fun book club meeting.
It would.
We all switch. Would anyone even know where to begin? That'd be good practice.
There's an unbelievable show about that between an atheist and a Christian that swapped.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
We have to walk
you're a good debater if you can do that.
Yeah.
Because who's been in a debate club? Yeah, you have to take the other side all the time, don't you?
You don't know which side you have to defend until you get called on.
Yeah. Ooh. Yeah. Anyone else want to add on that?
I had a question.
Yeah.
So do you think all of this, what we're talking about, that people have an innate or evolutionary morality, and how it shows up in different cultures, may it be, in different ways, maybe contrary to some, don't you think that maybe all of that points to a perfect, unchanging morality? Like a perfect, unchanging morality that maybe we're wrong about in this culture, maybe we're right about in this culture.
Oh, okay.
That instead of maybe a cultural relativism where, you know, this culture is right for them and this culture is right for them, maybe it's just we're all trying to get to this one, you know, perfect morality up here. I mean, that would be the absolute moral.
If it wasn't so night and day different among tribes. I mean, you know.
But
cultural norms.
We have an opinion about whether they're right or wrong, don't we?
I have my individual opinion. You have your individual opinion.
Like sati, which is the act of like burning a woman over her husband's funeral pyre.
Yep.
Right. We have an objective like that's completely
still goes on,
still wrong, still happens in that society, right?
We think slavery is wrong as well, but people didn't used to. In fact, the Bible, the Old Testament, didn't think it was.
So
wrong.
is it shifting paradigms where it used to be immoral, but now, or it used to be moral and now it's immoral, or has it always been immoral?
That's the question.
But we've been wrong about its morality.
Is there an absolute morality that we sometimes hit and sometimes miss, or is morality shifted by the latest poll and where we happen to live right here and now?
There is an absolute morality, but we shift it.
We shift
based on what we believe is true at the time.
Right.
I mean, look at modern society in America, right? Like, you know, and I'm not going to go into politics, but like gender issues and all that. A lot of people have moral issues with some of that stuff. That's new. A lot of that's very new. But it just shifts, but the shift isn't necessarily a good thing. I mean, all the shifting that happens with morality in society isn't like we're evolving as society, we're getting better.
So no matter how much the shift is occurring, just like Brady says, it's what you really, it's written on your heart what to really do.
I mean,
it's just whether you do it or
that's
not.
What you said. You said it's hardwired into us.
A lot of it is. A lot of it's tribal. In fact, it might be 50-50. Who knows? I'm not a social scientist, but a lot of it isn't. We still have an R complex. We still have a brainstem directly. It looks, acts, and functions just like, you know why it's called R complex? It's reptilian. There's parts, there are innate actions that we suppress as humans right now that you wouldn't, man, I like Ken's cell phone. If there were no laws and there was no penalty, I'm just going to take that cell phone. It's a fine line. Laws, civil society, penalties for that dictate a lot of it. There's still basal urges. You have something that's mine. I'm going to take that. I'm going to club her over the head and drag her in my cave. A lot of that still exists down there. It's just deep-seated and repressed. It's down deep. So yeah, there are a lot of innate parts to it. But I think most of it is tribal and cultural nowadays.
Shane, did I misunderstand you? Did you say as society progresses, as time passes on, the morality always gets better?
No.
It can go either direction, right?
It goes either direction. And it's just based on the wants and desires of the people there at the time.
But if you don't have a lawgiver, if you don't have a deity or something like that, then whatever is what ought. It's equal. I mean, you're just defining what the current, put your finger in the air, get the wind shift, and this is what it ought to be. You have nothing else to appeal to.
It's a democratic process, and it's based on maximum increase in flourishing and well-being and decrease in suffering.
This was the problem that you have with the Arab Spring. Just because you can vote doesn't mean that you are going to vote for freedom.
That's true.
And that's where we hit the Judeo-Christian underpinning of this country, and the whole reason we can have these conversations is because of those Christian values that, the free will idea, which
just fell off the cliff with that one right there.
But
I don't want to go on that tangent.
I don't think Collins was getting into
no, I know.
There's an absolute morality, only that everybody seems to sense that there is such a thing.
I think I've often... Go ahead.
Oh, I just think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where we are very, like, after like physiological stuff is taken care of, like it's the sense of belonging becomes super important.
Yes.
And so if you're going to belong, it means you need to follow the same rules roughly as everyone around you. So since we are creatures that we're not lone creatures, you know, like we're humans by nature. We like to be together. We like to it's difficult, and we learn less whenever we're apart. And so I don't know, I just think that in regards to morality, you find a morality that's similar to the other people around you, and then you kind of go with it from there. So kind of like the tribal thing that you were saying.
If every other species on the planet except Homo sapiens didn't have that, then you would kind of have a good argument. Because, wow, we're completely different from all the other millions. But we see all the other millions of species, they have the same thing. They have rules and laws and social structures and order and broods and, you know, hierarchies. If that didn't exist, if it only existed in Homo sapiens, it'd be a huge argument in your favor.
I'm not Christian, for the record.
Yeah, I think she was arguing, I meant the argument in a different direction, that maybe you were saying that might explain some of this sense of morality that goes beyond just propagating my own DNA. Why do you do things to help the whole culture? Well, maybe you're getting into beyond just personal preservation. You're getting into some of these higher areas of that you were talking about.
Because you're part of the culture, and you want to live in a culture that maximizes flourishing for all of us, including myself. You know, so it is indirectly selfish to want a better society to live in. I think, though sometimes I can get sanctimonious about my own morality and think, well, you know, the South, when they promoted slavery leading up to the Civil War, it's like, how could they have been so blind? But I think, truth be told, the North didn't depend on slavery because they had industry. So economically, they weren't motivated to need. They didn't have that need for slavery to survive, whereas the South felt they did. And I think in the future, I wonder what kinds of things 100 years from now people will look back and say, how could we have been so blind? Like, for example, you know, maybe they'll come up with a way to grow meat in the laboratory. It's already starting to happen. So then all meat will come not through the slaughtering of a sentient animal, but through growing a meat in the lab. And they'll look back at us and say, how could you have been so barbaric, you know, to raise cattle in difficult conditions and slaughter them and so forth, just for your gustatory pleasure.
I think we see a little bit of that already with in the area of ecology and you know what, trying to have a zero carbon footprint and these kinds of things. That this is not just a, hey, this might be good. This is becoming a moral issue now. You're immoral if you live in a house twice as big as you actually need, or you're doing these kinds of things. So, and so fast forward, not even 100 years, 20 years from now, how immoral are we? You know, when we've got an air conditioner running upstairs and downstairs. You know, so what are we thinking?
Yeah, we all drove here.
We're immoral. We all drove here.
I walked here.
Yes, you're the
only moral one in the whole group.
C.S. Lewis said, understanding right and wrong is a universal feature of humanity. Okay, we're off to that. He also said, harmony between science and religion does not necessarily mean a total lack of disagreement. That he was a proponent. We've heard of the non-overlapping magisteria. That's the idea that science and religion can peacefully coexist. That there's no points of contention. That you can believe in evolution and still be a Christian, for instance. What are some claims out there that you all feel, believers and non-believers, are incompatible? Well, science and religion cannot agree. It has to be one or the other. Are there any, or is there a non-overlapping magisteria?
I don't have any.
They can exist peaceful, coexist.
Let me say this, because I when you first wrote that, I was thinking about that a little bit, and I think it. Overall, yes, because science is measuring something different than spiritual, and it does. It's the wrong. It's not that it's bad. It's just like when you're trying to do astronomy with a microscope. It's not that microscopes are evil. It's just you got the wrong tool for that. So
very different.
However, while there is no overlap, you can have it. This is the area of we're talking about spiritual things. We have no way of measuring something that's non-physical. Okay. However, there are claims that can be made by Christians that are measurable. There are claims that can be made, and depending on how if those claims are necessary to the major propositions of that religion, then yes, you can come in with science and do a lot of damage. I was just trying to take the same parallel I have with my experience with Mormonism, and as a former Mormon myself, I believe the Book of Mormon because I had a spiritual experience about it. But there were a lot of historical facts that were getting in the way, and claims about the where Native Americans come from, and that, are they actually Jewish? Can DNA speak to that issue? And
both of those claims could not exist simultaneously. It had to be one or the other.
There are Mormons who don't. I mean, this is kind of a new development as the science comes out, and we have some pretty damaging information that says that the Native Americans could not possibly be Jewish for a bunch of different reasons. I won't go into in this forum, but you have Mormon scientists who are geneticists and that are archaeologists and anthropologists, and some of them will say they believe the Book of Mormon is true, but they just don't believe it happened. It is an extended parable. It is like Jesus tells a parable. We didn't say, well, what country did that happen in? It's a story. The purpose of it is to teach you important things about God, not to give a history lesson of what happened in the neighboring village. And so they say, well, I believe the Book of Mormon is true. It's the Word of God. I just don't believe there really were Nephites and Lamanites, and I don't believe it was a historical book. Now, the church itself does not condone that, but there is ways that Mormons have tried to deal with those problems. But this is an example you talk about. Where does science actually, I guess you could say Mormonism could survive in some level, not looking at the Book of Mormon as historical in any way.
Right. It's all based on your interpretation of the text, because you have some Christians that will say that the text tells me that the earth is fewer than 10,000 years old. Others will say, oh no, it could be any age, but science tells us it's much greater than 10,000 years old. So there is a conflict there. If you have one in particular interpretation of the Bible,
it's one or the other.
The science does not support a young earth, period.
But would you agree as a whole that science doesn't have the tools to be addressed the issues of theology?
It can only address issues where there are claims made by the religion that impinge on the physical world.
Come into the material world.
Yeah,
the two examples I thought were healing through prayer and miracles affecting the physical environment. So,
well, I mean, science doesn't tell us anything. Science provides data, and how we interpret that data is based on the worldview that we look at it through. So therefore, if you have a scientist who has a naturalistic, materialistic worldview, he's not going to even... I mean, if God is not even a possibility at the onset, it's never going to be in play in terms of whether or not that a supernatural event could ever happen. Even though the evidence, when we look at it, I mean, if Big Bang cosmology is correct, the evidence is telling us that there was a supernatural event that occurred that set all this into motion.
Non-physical.
How do we go about confirming a supernatural event like that? Because right now, all Big Bang cosmology tells us is that we don't know what started the Big Bang.
Well, it had to be spaceless, timeless, material, not physical.
Let's not do a first cause thing.
Well, admittedly, it does come into.
Well, it does come into the book.
That is something that he does bring up.
Yep.
And he
You're
brings
right.
Up, he brings up.
Looks like when, because she had something
before
you. Could you not remember, or you just didn't want to?
I don't want to.
All right. All right.
Yeah, because he kind of. I don't know if I have in my notes, but he brings up the idea of multiverse cosmology and these ideas that right now we don't have the tools to confirm. It's just necessarily blocked out from us. We don't have the ability to investigate other dimensions. But by the same token, we don't have the tools to investigate the supernatural dimension either. So I don't know how you could say, oh, it was God, not the multiverse, or it was the multiverse, not God. Right now, there's just a gap in our knowledge.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, I think what's trying to be said is that that everything that began to exist has a cause, and the effect can't be its own cause. So if no matter existed, well, matter, energy, space, and time.
At what point did no matter exist?
Before the singularity.
There's no such. That's. I'm trying to say this as nice as I can. That's illogical. It's completely illogical.
Because
there is no before. A t equals 0. Time equals 0. The singularity is everything that is in a single point, right? There was no before that because it's not moving. Time is just a measurement of movement through space. So time didn't exist. So there is no before.
So
we don't know. So
that's why
the first premise in the Kalam is everything that began to exist.
Yeah.
There was no before that.
Well, that's why whatever it was
has to be outside the
had
time
to be
space
outside.
continuum.
We have no way of knowing if that singularity has always been there or not been there. We don't know 1 nanosecond before that, whatever that means.
So because we don't.
So as far as we know, everything has always been here.
Forever?
So that's
No,
infinite.
that's-
right?
You got a better idea?
You back to steady
But
state
that's
law.
harder to believe. I mean, at its core.
And it's logical fallacy to prove a negative.
Because it's like,
You can't prove
that's
a
it, but I
negative.
mean, you go to the simplistic stuff of, okay, well, that's like saying a TV.
I don't know.
exists.
No, that's fine.
Shane, I don't know, but
Things have always existed.
listen to the first
Everything's
premise.
been created. I mean, I know this. It's very.
Listen to the first
simplified.
premise in the Kalam. Everything that begins to exist. We know the singularity is something. It is a thing, right? It exists, right? We don't know.
Was it eternal or did it begin to exist?
So then Kalam falls apart, I think. I bet we're going to get blown up in the comment section now.
But do we not all agree that? I guess we don't. That there's a starting point or creation of some kind of what is here.
Well,
Assumption.
I think what the Kalam addresses is the 19th century, 18th
There's no
century,
thing better.
really even back to Greek philosophy, that the universe is steady state, is eternal, has always existed. This is what was called into question, with
The
Einstein.
steady state model, this is pre-inflation,
Right.
cosmological inflation. We're talking about singularity. I don't know, is there a steady state model of the singularity? Is that what? I don't know. I think the steady state model is after the inflation, after the
Well,
cosmology.
the universe has always existed. You don't need a God necessarily if the universe has always existed. You just need enough time for the matter to develop to such a degree that you get abiogenesis, or not even a proof.
That's why we're here, man. It's the biggest question of all.
With Einstein, with Hubble, with the cosmologists today, they all say, now again, science is a moving target, and science can self-correct, and there may be a model that comes out 20 years from now that will make a lot more sense than the singularity model, but if some form of the singularity model is so, that means that matter, energy, space, and time came into existence at a point, and
came into existence. Came into existence.
But that is the theory.
I don't know how
you can't go backwards one
The
more
theory
second
starts at
before
T.
that.
Okay. Oh, the book that we just talked, that I just mentioned it in the intro,
Yeah.
The Brief History of Time. It does. There is no before T equals 0.
Exactly.
It
that's
starts
my
at
point.
nanoseconds after T equals 0.
This is why you can't
T
say given
equals-
enough time, the bang will happen. There is no time.
Right.
You can't say, well, the
We can't say
matter
what
was
happened
all
before that
compressed
either.
into one tiny point. There's no matter. There's no matter. There's no energy. There's no space. There's no time.
I think any sense of causation breaks down
What do you
when there's
like?
no time
What does it have to
involved.
be? Who?
So
Any
I think we're in a
naturalistic
position like, for example, 10,000,
laughing at me?
5,000 years ago, people wondered, well, what is
You're
the
laughing
Earth
at me?
sitting on? Some people thought, well, it's pillars.
Okay.
Some people thought it's elephants or turtles or whatever, because in their experience, everything heavy sits on something else, right? So they couldn't conceive that the Earth was a ball being held by gravity going around the sun. They were completely ignorant of that. They could, in their wildest dreams, they could have never come up with that scenario that we now know is true. We're in a situation now where we can't really imagine what's going on inside of a singularity or what it even means. So for us to speculate and say we know that it had to be this or that, everything breaks down. The laws of cause and effect. Maybe everything within the universe that begins to exist has a cause, but the universe itself is not a thing in the universe. It's a different category altogether.
Well, the closest I've heard to that explanation was the debate with Bill Craig and Sean Carroll. And Carroll said something along those lines of causality assumes a temporal, that it happens before, and then Craig, I think, said either before or simultaneous with. But when you don't have time to work with, then do you lose causality too?
Yeah, I mean, I just think we're in a position where if we were to speculate that there's turtles holding up the world, we're making a mistake to even speculate. So just like we had to wait till science showed what actually happened. We have to claim ignorance and say we can't know what happened at the time of the Big Bang. So ignorance is better than false.
So it's
false
science,
hypothesis.
So it's science, scientific proof, or ignorance. Those are the two choices.
Well, but you know it's natural for sure.
We don't like ignorance.
But you know it's natural for sure, or is that naturalism of the gaps?
I don't know that it's natural, but I can't make a leap one direction or the other without any further
It's okay
information.
to hold out.
Would you say it's possible supernatural then?
Yes.
No, I think
Absolutely.
there can be science and ignorance, and the third option is speculation. But you have to understand that is speculation.
Right.
That's it. It's just speculation.
For sure.
Or withholding judgment in
Good
the
point.
absence of anything else.
Right. It's just speculation.
Yeah, and yes, supernatural could be the answer. But let's not throw our hands up and just say invisible friend did it.
But you'll never be able to prove that scientifically if it's supernatural.
There's
right?
proof doesn't exist in science. It's just mountains of evidence. Gravity's still a theory.
Yeah. But if it's supernatural, you won't. I mean, you're not gonna.
But there could be
evidence.
there could be more evidence and models come out that are plausible that would change our opinions.
Mm-hmm. So Jim, are you arguing for a universal universal agnosticism?
I haven't made a positive claim tonight.
No, I'm just saying. If you go with what you're saying,
Yeah.
does that lead to a universal agnosticism? I mean, does it rule out both atheism and theism? If you say, I'm not going to speculate.
We might not have the same definition of atheism then. There's weak and strong, right?
Right,
Okay.
right. He gave 4 categories in the book.
I'm an agnostic atheist.
Okay.
I know maybe this many strong atheists in my entire life. Most of us are weak atheists.
So that was actually kind of where what I was curious about. Too.
Yeah. So as far as if I made a strong atheist makes the positive claim that yes, so then yes, it would apply. What you're saying, but I can withhold judgment in the absence of holding out for more evidence. And us little 3 million years just climbed out of the trees, and we're on this spinning dirt clod, and it's only got maybe 2.5 billion years left before the seas boil up, and we have to go colonize somewhere else. That should be our main focus. Who knows? And we're just infinitesimally insignificant. The hubris that we of anything alive or could be alive in the universe is going to figure it out. But that's why we're here. There's a lot of questions that I think we can find the answer to. With regard to this question, I lean towards being a permanent agnostic in principle instead of a temporary agnostic in practice. But that being said, there's a lot of questions I think we can get to the bottom of and answer while we're here. So this book club, is not for nothing.
Just to clarify, is that getting to the bottom of something with near certain probability or a knowing?
Everyone puts a percentage on it, right?
Yeah.
Which,
right.
1 to 100, God doesn't exist, God does exist. What's your percentage?
I'm not going to play that game right now.
All right, but most of you here would... Yeah. I would be very surprised if the believers here were anything less than 99, right? But the atheists were between 60s and 99. That he's not, I think I'm not going to say more intellectually honest, but I don't know.
Yeah,
we hold out for.
But what I'm saying, the reason for asking that is, it's like, so Sextus Empiricus was someone kind of ancient Greece time. And he believed that because we can't know anything for certain and objectively, we should just suspend judgment on everything.
Yeah.
Right?
Now we have to define what does it mean to know.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah,
Right.
Justin?
Who was that? Who was the made that comment?
Sextus Empiricus. Yeah.
And I bet if we were well, there's 13 people in this room, we'd get 13 different answers of what it means to know something.
Sam, I haven't seen him lately. He takes that position.
Yeah.
That he can't really
Kind of a
know
logical
something outside his
positive.
Well, and the one thing I can say is I have a strong respect for atheists because they do what a lot of Christians don't do, and that's think, right? Because you have lots of Christians that just I believe it because, right?
Oh, yeah.
Well, everyone here too.
So
You're here.
Yes.
Everyone here. If you didn't want to think, you wouldn't be here.
Yeah,
so
no, I
everyone
know.
here wants to think.
I know, but the nice thing about atheists is most of them are in that role because they are thinking. I mean, there's some thought going on. At least at some point in time there was. And that's nice to see.
Unless their parents were atheists, maybe they just inherited by default, which is less common.
Yeah, less common.
Yeah, but I just wanted there's a positive comment.
And there's not just a book to follow on that. So
I'm going to put this forward as an analogy, and I don't know if it's going to work as well as I think it's going to. we'll try this live on the internet for posterity. But so way back, like the Greeks figured out that the Earth was round, but they didn't have transoceanic sailing vessels, so they didn't know what was on the opposite side of the world. We know now, with the technology that we have, that whatever was on the other side was not God. They could have said it was God, but we've since figured out how to break that boundary, and we've seen what's on the other side, and God was not there.
It's not turtles.
It wasn't turtles. And that, we knew the planets existed, but we couldn't get outside of our own atmosphere. You could have said that God was outside the atmosphere, that we've since developed the technology to go beyond that. We've broken that barrier. We know there's more out there. God is not there. And obviously this will be speculation, but I hope that at some point we develop the technology to see what lies beyond the beginning of the Big Bang. I don't know that maybe God will be there, maybe he won't, but I don't think we can look at that boundary and say for sure that God has to be on the other side. I think that is taking the current evidence.
You don't have to. That is true.
Yeah, I don't know that the Kalam even says that. I think it just says has to have a cause. You know, it doesn't say that certainly doesn't. You can't come from Kalam and say that's the Christian God.
Do you think there could be a non-God cause? Does anyone apply the Kalam to anything other than God?
Well, they're implying that there's
unicorns.
an implication, though, that it would be, something, a being outside the time-space continuum who is immaterial, extremely powerful, and intelligent.
And personal.
Well, Bill Craig's version of the Kalam ends with the what sentence? And we call this cause God.
Yeah.
It's a caveat at the end.
Can't wrote that at the bottom.
Well, and Collins in his video, I know it's not the book, but in his video, he had mentioned a fact, according to him, and I've never heard the statistic, but he said 40% of scientists believe in a personal God. Does that seem like a high number?
Seems high to me.
It seemed high. I mean, when he said it, I had to take it back because he said.
Is that where he said in the book something? I don't remember the 40%, but he said something like that a lot of scientists, are cautious to talk about that because of peer pressure.
Yeah. But he said 40% believe in a personal.
I've heard that
God.
before. That is true.
Which that's a.
But among the kind of more elite echelons, the National Academy of Sciences, for example, which is the cream of the cream, only about 10% or fewer.
I think it's 97% are pretty much atheistic.
Right.
Yeah, what field of science you're in probably makes a big difference.
Huge difference.
Yeah.
Yeah, the biological sciences are more atheistic than the physical science.
Before we take our break here in a minute, let me just address the big question. can evolution be true? If Collins is right, can evolution be true? And would anybody say that he at all compromises on the theory of evolution and doesn't really embrace it? Okay. Can evolution be true and also there be a God? Or is he just inconsistent in his thinking, or is that logically possible? Yes, both can be equally true.
Why not?
A God could create an evolutionary process.
That's what he's saying.
That's
Biologos.
fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll just add this: 59% of all U.S. Christians, and of those, 75% of the evangelical Christians don't believe in evolution at all. So there's our numbers: 59% of Christians overall, and 75% of evangelicals do not accept.
I think Collins would say Christians have been told if you start to believe in evolution, then you're disbelieving in God.
Yeah.
And so Christians stop in this. I'm not saying I agree with Collins. I'm just saying I think that's what he's trying to argue. Do you think there could be some validity to that?
Yeah, for sure. I think the church has run away from science multiple times. Just got scared and run away instead of embracing it. And if Christianity is true, you should be wholeheartedly embracing.
Well, it's a view of science kind of as its own religion, as kind of an anti-Christian religion. I mean, I think there's a lot of Christians that view it that way.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
And so if science says this, get away.
Just don't listen to it.
As if its ultimate goal is to disprove Christianity or religion in general. Yeah.
Well, we're going to go ahead and take our break, and for those who are watching on Facebook Live, we'll be back in about 10 minutes, so just hang on for that. We're also going to be announcing when we come back from the break our next book that we'll be looking at, and I think you'll be excited about this one. And we'll take about 10 minutes. There's coffee. There's brownies left. Do we have brownies left?
There's some brownies.
Brady left a few brownies in there, so we'll take 10 minutes and come back at 8:13.
3, 2, 1.
Well, welcome back to the Atheist Christian Book Club. This is the April 2018 edition, and what we are is a monthly gathering of atheists and Christians who gather together to discuss important books from both perspectives. This is our 1-year anniversary. This is 12 months now that we've been doing this. We've been having a really good time and looked at a lot of interesting books over the this last year. We have our co-founder is Bill Cluck. Bill can't be with us today, so subbing for him we have Jim Hall. Jim Hall is the host of Atheist Edge, so we have him on loan. He has quite a few interesting videos that you can go to his site and see. What would be the best way to get there?
YouTube.com/Atheist Edge. Not the Atheist Edge, just Atheist Edge.
Or atheistedge.com, and
that'll take you to the Facebook Atheist Edge page. Yeah.
Okay. So it's but primarily YouTube channel. Right?
Yep. Yep. This is about 115 videos.
Right, and we have this is our second club event to try to go YouTube. I mean to go Facebook Live with, and Jim, you want to say something to our viewing audience?
Oh shoot! Put me on the spot. What did I say last time? I don't want to repeat myself.
Nice.
Hey, we've been going just like James said. We've been doing this a year now, and Bill Cluck, James Walker, when they put this together, we had no idea how it was going to go down. We didn't know if it was going to grow wings like it has, and now, I mean. Our only problems with this group, I don't know, maybe you can attest to this, is just a rapid growth. We're trying to find ways. That's why we're online. That's why we're live now, because this venue itself, when we get some big speakers in here, we've had Aaron Ra, we had Tim McGrew here, Christian apologist, and a evolutionary advocate. And when we get the big names here, this place will fill up. I mean, we'll pack the house. The venue itself, we're at capacity for those events. So the only way to expand at this point right now is online. So through you all and atheistchristianbookclub.com.
If they had a question, they're watching on Facebook Live right now. If they had a question or want to make a comment, they can just put that in the comment section.
That's right.
We have somebody monitoring that, and we'll try to get it before the whole group. So you just take a minute and talk about next month. We have a book This is something that Ken recommended, gave us some nice recommendations about, I think, 8 or 9 different books. And I went through, and Bill was actually pushing us for one book and suggesting that book for us, but we ended up going a different direction. Our book for next month is going to be May 4th, and we're going to be looking at a book by David Madison, 10 Tough Problems in Christian Thought and Belief. Now, David is a former Christian pastor. He is a graduate of Boston College with a PhD in Biblical Studies, and he's a current member of the Clergy Project. How many of you know what the Clergy Project is? Jim, take a minute and tell everybody else what the Clergy Project is.
Correct me if I'm wrong, those of you that know it better than I do. It's a nonprofit organization that uses all its funding to help those that are currently leaders in not just Christians, but any type of leadership in any church, mosque, synagogue, anything, where these church leaders have strayed from the faith. They've seen the light and they came to our side. No, I'm just telling you. Because when you do it for a living, yeah, financial support, set you up with a place to live, set you up with some job skills, some job training to get you going back on your feet. Because you think about it, if you're a pastor, it happens all the time. But what do they normally do? The ones that they stay in the closet. How many pastors out there said, Dan Barker? Who's the one down in Louisiana? The preaching atheist. I forget. You know what I'm talking about? He said he was still preaching. He was head pastor at a church for 2 years before he finally got the nerve up. So here he is every Sunday doing his sermons, just in the closet.
I think, especially here in the Bible Belt, it's kind of hard to come out of the closet regardless of your occupation. But if you're a pastor, it reminds me of kind of a different situation with one of our board members who, at a certain point, interviewing one of the staff that was not qualified anymore to be a minister. At some point he said, are you saying this might affect my job? Yes. So if you're an atheist, it kind of limits the possibilities of what you can do in the area of ministry. So this is, I guess, where the Clergy Project comes into being able to at least provide a halfway house or something to help.
We'll take a crack at it. I've never even heard of the book, so...
I don't want it to be thought that I'm giving my full endorsement to it. It was one of the 9 that I put out there.
You tell us more about it. So you had some caveats as well.
Yeah, he contacted me a couple months ago. He wanted to promote his book, and he knew I was in this world, and he would actually love coming here, I'm sure, to promote it as well. But he's overseas right now on a vacation, a 40-year anniversary with his husband. He's gay. And so his style is very witty, maybe not wouldn't be appreciated by certain Christians who would be offended by kind of ridicule. So there is some ridicule in the book. So just giving you a fair warning.
We'll try to look over.
I don't personally favor that style, but as a non-believer, I mean it can be entertaining. I have to give you that, but I know that it's at the expense of those whose sensibility. I'm married to a...
You're laughing at our expense.
Yeah, I mean, I'm married to an evangelical Christian, so I tend to be more circumspect about the way I speak, but he lets loose pretty much. Right. So,
yes. Well, maybe he'll be able to do a Skype interview. A lot of the authors will actually take pre-questions from our group, and then we will do a Skype interview, and you guys have watched that where we talked to Hugh Ross, we talked to... Who's the mythicist guy?
David Fitzgerald. Justin Brierley in London.
Yeah. In fact, ironically, we had 4 new members the next month. They live in Texas, but they heard about it from London because they heard Justin talking about the club.
Weird. How long has David Madison been out of the ministry?
He's in his 70s, so I mean, he was in the ministry for I think 7 years.
The book's new. The book came out last year. So most of his
life he's not been a believer.
Well, I asked that because he said he was in a 40-year relationship with his husband. And I was just wondering if he had to conceal that while he was a minister. That must have been incredible pressure on him.
No, it was after he left the ministry. He was married.
Like it was his wife.
Yeah, I mean just to keep
double in the closet.
That would have been something.
Yep.
Yeah. Interesting book. Right?
So the book is new, and he was not a traditional evangelical Christian. He was I don't know that he ever really believed the Bible very much. He was more of a, I mean, he did believe in God, definitely, from what I could tell. If you want to read on the back of Amazon, they have an author's description, and it kind of goes into a lot more depth.
You know
about that stuff.
what denomination he was a pastor?
Methodist.
Methodist.
Oh,
Yeah. So, and that can be, different depending on what Methodist church you happen to be a part of. But it sounds intriguing. One of the things I like about these 10 chapter books and 12 chapter books is, if you don't have time to really get into every detail of every one, just pick out your favorite problem and just go, focus on that, work on that, and have your questions. So what I'll do is, like always, I'll send everybody, if I have your email address and you're part of the list, I'll send you an email that has links to the book. Sometimes we find even free copies of books sometimes online. So it is available as a Kindle book, I think for $10. Or if you have Kindle Unlimited, it's one of the free ones that you can read it for free. So, any questions on that? Well, let's go back to our club topic again, and again we're talking about the language of God, and any questions or comments on that?
Any of these you want to hit on for sure?
I hit on
number 11 would be fun to talk about.
Let's okay. We'll do one more from mine, but Kevin's got a whole lot.
Oh yeah, Kevin.
Yeah, so we'll just hit one more of mine and then get away. Oh yeah, that is good. That's a good one. Okay, this will be my last one. And Kevin, get ready, because right after this we're going to move to yours. All right?
Be ready on this one too, Kevin.
Now this kind of ties in. It dovetails what we were talking about just a little bit earlier, but for those of you that cannot accept natural selection, is the literal Garden of Eden necessary? Did it actually have to happen the way the Old Testament says? And if it did, how do you square that circle? Now here's my rationale. You kind of have to believe in Adam and Eve literally for the fall of man, for the original sin. And without them, why would you need a redeemer, Jesus? So let's go from there.
With that. I mean, and I'm speaking as a Christian for anybody who's listening who doesn't know what perspective I'm coming from here, but if you read Genesis, there's clearly two different stories of creation that don't agree with one another. So that tells you...
Say that again.
No, so I mean, that tells you right off that it's obviously meant to be a parable about God's relationship with man more than it is to be a literal description of events. At least that's my interpretation.
Is there anyone that thinks it was literal? I don't mean to put you on the spot. Yeah, there are some.
Okay.
Yeah, that's over half.
Well, I'm not going to take the other side and debate that, but there are clearly two accounts of creation. God did different things on different days and in different orders, and I'm not saying that's important, but it does kind of shoot a hole in the literalist inerrancy. So.
Oh, yeah, and that's what it comes down to. I mean, if you believe the Bible is inerrant and it's 100% God breathed, then yes. I mean, if that's what you believe.
Inerrancy doesn't take away. Was this literal or?
This is something that all Christians have not agreed on historically.
Yeah.
And this is way before Darwin. You had Christians asking questions like, was it an actual snake, or was this symbolic of a type of a creature that was tempting, that is snake-like? Did snakes used to be able to talk and they lost that ability? Or is there something more symbolic happening here? It goes even further than that, which it gets into, the whole issue. The question, and regardless of where I stand on that issue, there are Christians that debate, was there no death in the garden or no death in the universe? No death of human death or animal death? Or plant death? Was there no plant death before the fall? Was there no enzymes? Was there no bacterial death in the intestines before the fall?
This is where we atheists could just sit back and let you fight each other.
Exactly. This is something that we don't need atheism to argue about.
And the nice thing, though, about that, James, is I think most Christians, Christians are so different. It's hard to even say most, because I don't have a clue. But I think on your number 9, your 55% of Christians and 75% of evangelicals may match fairly well with your question on number 11.
Probably, right?
It's probably going to be pretty close.
You said you're a literalist with regard to that.
I am.
Adam and Eve.
I'm a fundamentalist,
Okay,
literalist.
let's pick somebody maybe that is not. It's an analogy. It's a parable. And then how do you? Where was the original sin then? Where was was man born broken? Did it need to be an actual fall? Because God's original intent, correct me if I'm wrong, He did not intend for man to be broken. He did not originally intend for us to rebel, to fall, right?
Well, man was created innocent, not fallen.
So there had
and I think whether you take the Genesis account as being somewhat symbolic, whether it was an actual snake, was it actual fruit, or was that symbolic? But I think there's a pretty universal amongst evangelicals, at least, that there was a real fall.
And there was a specific point in time where man fell away.
No sin and then sin.
Right.
Yes.
We agree with that. So if it wasn't the fruit, the eating of the fruit, what was it? What caused it?
I'd have the same question you're asking.
You would.
Mm-hmm.
Someone answer it.
Conrad?
I don't have the answer to that.
You raised your hand, right? Do you think it really did happen? Okay.
I will give you an answer that I don't believe, but I've heard it many times, and different variations of it. There's a doctrine called serpent seed doctrine. That Eve's sin in the garden was sexual, not eating the wrong kind of food. And that she had sex with the serpent. That's why when Adam and Eve were caught in their sin, they covered the part of the body that was guilty. And so they didn't cover their mouths, they covered their genitals. And so the concept was that Cain was not, and I'm not saying I believe this at all. These are Christian cults that believe this. The Yahweh ben Yahweh, the apostle from Arkansas, what's his name? Can't remember all the time.
Why they got to sexualize it?
But there are hundreds of different sects that try to interpret that as being a literal event, but it wasn't actual fruit, and that means that Cain was not actually the son of Adam, but was the son of the serpent and Eve, and that's where the serpent seed is introduced. Another proponent of that would be Reverend Sung Myung Moon of the Unification Church. A lot of it's racist. There's a black version that's where the first white man came from, and then there's a racist version that's where the first black person came from. I think Reverend Moon said that's where the first communist came from. But anyway,
I agree.
But it's this serpent seed doctrine among some of the cults. This is not a Christian position. But there are Christians that do take it that it was a real fall, but may not have been an actual snake per se, or an actual fruit per se. That could have been.
Well, whatever indiscretion
it doesn't say apple. That's the other thing. It never says it's an apple.
It was an orange.
I would think banana for other reasons.
Whatever. Well, it's either according to the time and the time frame and the geographical location. If it did happen, it was a pomegranate or a date, right?
Yeah.
Okay. But no. Besides, forget the cause of the fall. Forget the cause of the fall. Just did that happen? And to tie back into the book,
that's for sure.
To tie back into the book. If it did happen, even remotely similar to how it's written, literally, you can't square that circle with evolutionary theory, right? This is man created poo from dirt, and woman from a rib. It's either that or it's not. It's evolutionary theory, and or something else.
I think some Christians would believe evolution can take place from that point forward, but not the.
You could also
that still contradicts.
No, it does. Then the
common ancestor.
To kind of understand a little bit of why Christians are reluctant to, even those that see those early chapters, first 11 chapters of Genesis, that see it as a form of mythology. And when you're talking about mythology, you're not necessarily talking about something that isn't true. Yeah. But you're talking about it, as the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. And so they see those first 11 chapters, and they say, well, we need to read them in their historical context understand the way language is used, the way stories are told, which leaves a lot of flexibility in that passage. But the reason that Christians are reluctant to let go of a literal Adam and Eve is because of the New Testament, because of Jesus Christ, because
that's what I'm
Jesus looks back and he seems to indicate that there is a literal Adam and Eve. And so that
the sins of Adam doesn't even actually say it at some point. Paul does, yeah.
But yes,
But one man sinner of the world. Don't forget.
Go for it, Chris.
I was going to say I could see where a theistic evolutionist could take the Adam and Eve story and say it's an allegory. But when you bring in the problem of sin, if I had been introduced to that idea when I was still a Christian, I would find that deeply unsatisfying. Because it's bad enough now with a literal Adam and Eve, where we, thousands or millions of years later, are still being punished for something that our distant ancestors do. Now, if the Garden of Eden is an allegory, now we're being punished for some vague offense that we don't even know about, and we don't know who committed it. And we are doomed either to fiery hell or eternal separation from God for this bad thing that some guy did some time ago.
Our own sins are bad enough to warrant that without Adam and Eve ever existing. So I do
But
believe
why do
historical
we
Adam and
sin
Eve.
if not for whatever this thing is?
Was
Now
there a
we're all of
cause
a
that
sudden,
set it all off?
We're in a crappy situation, and we don't even have a clue as to why that is.
But an atheist would believe in. I guess I don't know the atheist viewpoints.
I mean, you're forgetting about God.
Do you believe in sin? Just don't call it sin, or no?
Sin is a supernatural phenomenon.
Like the
I mean,
atheist.
sin is to defy a supernatural authority. So it's illogical to.
I know you wouldn't use the word sin, but I mean, I'm kind of
to commit an indiscretion, yeah, it's called violating the penal code of the state of Texas. For instance.
So things that aren't against the law that Christians may not do because they don't view it as.
You've got atheists that are subjective, objective.
Well, we could say that, going back to a morality discussion, we atheists, I think we all agree that we still have some standard of morality. That doesn't mean that we always live up to that standard of morality, and we may feel guilt when we do not. That is probably the closest.
But it's not because you're fallen that you're
right. It's not.
Yeah.
That's not because I've offended
feel
some
guilt.
deity. I've realized that
based
I
on a
failed to live up to
self-imposed
my own
code.
standards.
Right.
Or a code that your tribe imposed on you, then they culturally indoctrinated you, like laws. Or I was a Marine for 21 years. There's a code I still follow that I didn't follow prior to being a Marine, that I still feel guilty if I break it now. It was imposed on me, and I don't think that's a bad thing, because I feel like those match up pretty well with my personal code anyway, luckily.
Back to Chris's question, though, he was talking about, if there was no historical Adam, then, why are we being punished then? It's bad enough with you can at least point to a historical Adam, but now it's all nebulous, and, what is this all about then? I think the idea for the Christian position is, there's a little bit of what sounds initially like unfairness. Why am I being punished for what Adam did? It wasn't me. It wasn't my fault. Why wasn't I born in the Garden of Eden? So I'm being punished for this. But I think the Christian understanding is, given the same situation, we would have done just as bad or worse. So in a way, Adam was our father, but in another sense, he was a representative of the whole human problem. When left alone with only given one thing to do, you can do anything you want except one thing, we're going to do it.
So you're not paying for his, because none of you would have done any better anyway, right?
Right, and if you even remove that from the equation, you've done enough sin to
I can appreciate that perspective, but I just wonder, why is it even necessary to talk about Adam's sin as if it were something special? I mean, it happened to be the first one, but beyond that, it had no effect, right?
Well, the first of everything's always special.
But I think Christians typically believe it's more than just that, more than that it's just the first thing.
Well, there is a difference, and maybe I'm missing that difference in my explanation. I'm oversimplifying. Adam initially was innocent. None of us are born innocent. We're born, it's in our DNA, if you want to use that, go back to our book on that, that we are sinners. We don't have to teach children to do the wrong thing. It's innate. It's part of them. And it's just part of the human condition. So with Adam, he was in a situation, Adam and Eve, of innocence that we've never experienced before. So, but that said, I believe, I think I speak for most Christians, put me in the garden, I don't last as long as Adam did.
Well, I don't think most Christians feel like it's unfair or anything.
Well, and there's also a reverse that works in our favor. Why you say, well, it's unfair that the whole world gets punished for something that they didn't do. Adam did it. The second Adam, Jesus, can provide an atonement that every person can benefit, even though we didn't do it. So it works both directions. We get a benefit from the second Adam that we didn't deserve, although we inherited a liability from the first Adam.
Part of the reason why it's significant is because in the original intention of creation, God placed man as, the center point between the world and God. It was God, man, and the world. And the fall was an actual fall from man's place as that mediator, I guess, from in between, God and the world to being a part of the world. That's scriptural. And part of the reason why it's significant for Christians is because Jesus, coming in the form of man, places man back in that spot in between God and the world. So that, I think that answers your question. Why is it so significant in the first place?
Could I just throw an idea for you to consider? And, James, I'd be interested to hear you or Parker's view on this, or anybody's. So when a baby is born, it is, I think, admittedly, a very selfish creature. I mean, a baby's not concerned about anybody else's well-being except its own, right? That's kind of its natural state. Are you even halfway warm to the idea that Adam is maybe just an allegory for the fact that maybe we are not born as God wishes we would be, and we have to learn and achieve that?
I think it goes way beyond allegory, but I think the lessons holds true either way. But
and I'm not saying that's my.
And I'm thinking you can be a Christian and think it's allegory. I'm not saying that makes you a non-Christian or something. I think that's one of my takeaways from the book. I kind of knew that this was going to be divisive to Christians because he's so pro-evolution. But he's making the case that has nothing to do with the question of whether God exists. And so, but I did kind of wonder how the atheists would respond to that as well. A lot of you already knew that there were a lot of people like the Biologos people and stuff like that. But I think Aaron Ra, for example, I think that when he makes a real strong case for evolution, then he's just put the last nail in God's coffin, and not realizing, I think that Francis Collins is going to say, well, no, that's two different questions we're dealing with.
The only nail in the coffin is the literal interpretation of those stories. That's the only thing it destroys.
So this is kind of a segue into the question that I mentioned during the break, is that I was always, in my Christian environment that I grew up in, I was always told that the reason why scientists accept evolution is primarily because they want to get God off their backs. They want to live their own lives. And so I think that the question that comes to mind when reading a book by someone like Francis Collins, who's evidently a strong evangelical believer, what would, and I know he didn't sway most of you who, or maybe any of you who were creationists to adopt his evolutionary position. So what would your perspective be on why someone like Collins would embrace evolution, if not to get God off his back?
Greatest question of the night. That's good.
I just think that's an unfair assumption anyways, to say the only reason anybody would embrace this.
Yeah, I was just saying that.
Yeah, I know you're not
the background that I grew up in, that was a common refrain.
Yeah, and I've heard that, but I just don't think that's fair.
But how about his main question?
Well, I think
what would the motivation be for an evangelical Christian to embrace evolution?
I think it has it's a really strong scientific theory. That's my answer. I think it's a strong.
Let me ask it this way: did any of you hear anything that if you didn't read Ra's book or in any other kind of context, any of an argument for evolution from Francis Collins where you said, well, that is interesting? Anything on that?
You mean to sway towards evolution?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the whole thing.
I mean, he went into the genes, and well, even if you think God just created these animals and man all separate and just used some of the same whatever, they're still, they have the same genes. And he went through one strand in particular. I'm going back to the video again because I watched that yesterday. He just showed the strand of 3 genes in a cow, mice, and human. And they were all the same, except the human one of them doesn't work anymore.
It looks damaged.
Yeah.
That's why we can't produce vitamin C.
And that was a bad thing. And
it doesn't seem to be beneficial.
It's like we devolved in a way in that regard. But seeing that doesn't make me think, oh, well, then we all are, intertwined somehow. I still view it as God created these separate.
One of the things I have heard from opponents to evolution along those lines, I thought that was very compelling, his argument there. But I've heard it said that some of those kinds of things we see could be an example of devolution. That there may have been that you go back long enough, there would be humans that was a working gene, and that somehow got damaged over time.
But why is it also damaged in apes in the same position of the genome?
Well, that's a good question.
So you're saying that all of these events coincidentally happened on the same gene. They were broken on the same gene, so that none of us can produce our own vitamin C. We depend on fruit and vegetables to get our vitamin C.
That's an excellent point right there.
It's compelling.
So maybe it was an orange.
Thank you.
It's an allegory for vitamin C.
That's good. Justin, I can read your mind. You want to explain? Do you want to talk about that? I saw you.
That was the one thing that led me to believe in evolution. That one point there. I mean, then everything else started to fall into place. I saw, whales, sperm whales, some of which have legs that come out. So maybe 1 in 1,000 will be born without legs, or with legs. The other 999 don't have legs.
They all have bovine pelvises still.
So
hello.
It's called an atavism. It suggests that the sequence is there to generate legs. Why is it expressed in just a few individuals if that was God's design? I mean, you can make some ad hoc explanation for that, but it just is consistent with evolution. You start to add all of these things together, and Collins was only touching the tip of the iceberg. There is such a vast amount of evidence, interweaving evidence that supports evolution, that most creationists, maybe I'm being unkind, but most creationists who set out to attack evolution look at one little thing at a time and try to poke holes in it. But I think there's a lack of appreciation of the breadth and depth of all the interlocking evidence.
Creationists would look at that as an overall design that God had, and that's why the similarities exist. And I don't know how we could prove that one.
Which goes back to the supernatural aspect of it.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Let me
want to do
Kevin
Kevin stuff? Yeah.
And I just Kevin did a great little synopsis for us. Except it would have been nice before you had to read the book, like you could have cheated and just read the synopsis. But all of this is good, Kevin. But I want you to pick out the chapter or the section here, so we make sure we deal with the most important before we run out of time.
Well, my question would be one we've talked about many times in the group, and James was just hinting at it whenever he said, "I'm curious how the atheist would respond." My question would be similar to that. Was there any material, like James asked, that moved any of us either away from our position or confirmed us in our position or made us open to a new position? Because that seems to be kind of a common thread that comes up a lot. It was at the heart of the Anthony Flew book. He's giving his testimony saying, these are the things that moved me from being the world's premier atheist to being a theist. Collins is saying, these are the things that moved me from being an atheist to a theist. Likewise, I'm sure the book that we read next time will be the gentleman saying, these are the things that moved me from being a Christian to an atheist. We've been doing this for a year, like Jim was talking about. How much change or difference or whatever have these books made in us? We've been reading these books, spending time discussing them together. And frankly, it's fun for just the intellectual exchange. But are we changing as a result of this?
I am. Jesus' birth, 10-year time gap, Herod and Quirinius. Thanks to Brady, I changed my mind completely on that, and I'll never bring up that 10-year contradiction again. The Herod and Quirinius thing. Yep. Oh, the fine-tuning thing is a big crack. It started out as just a little crack in my dam. Now it's a big crack in my dam. The fine-tuning thing. So that ceases. I mean, that hasn't ceased to. It's gotten bigger.
That's a really powerful argument to me, actually. So.
I know for me on the Francis Collins book, it was, there are things about real hardcore fundamental creationism that I don't care for. Okay, although I believe in creation, I believe God created, but I'm talking about creationism, capital C, a fundamentalist form of that it runs against the grain. But I had a much deeper appreciation for ID, intelligent design, and still find arguments of it compelling. But Collins did a pretty good job of actually saying in some ways that there are parallels with this, another kind of God of the gaps. And I've always looked at that as two separate issues, two separate questions. Is evolution true? Is Earth young or old? These are separate questions. Is there a God? Did Jesus rise from the dead? All these are different questions that aren't necessarily interconnected to each other. But the book raises some compelling arguments, and I think my position's been moderated on that, although I can't put my finger on exactly where I am right now.
Let's hit some Kevin stuff before. Oh.
So I consider myself an agnostic. So I'm kind of open to something to sway me. But I really didn't find it here. I found I think he makes 2-3 big arguments, right? The moral law, the altruism didn't move me. Because, anomalies exist. They're consistent with evolution. Who's to say a million years from now, all the altruists will be dead? There'll be no altruism, right? But the other one of that feeling of joy, that a need exists only because there's something to fulfill it, I didn't really buy that. Because there are lots of needs we have. They don't necessarily need to be fulfilled. And a couple others, especially, this has been a burning question for me. Why would a loving God allow suffering in the world? And nobody has been able to really answer that to my satisfaction, and nor was he. Now, he did say at the individual level that, out of suffering we become better people and there's learning. I agree. I agree. I made a lot of mistakes and I've learned, but I don't understand at the mass level, right? There are slums and there are people, in misery, calamities. I was 7 years old and I remember my dad reading from the newspaper, like, it's a bus full of devotees going on a pilgrimage, and the whole bus, collides and everybody dies. So it makes no sense. So these are the kinds of things, I don't know, I didn't really...
We've
didn't
talked.
Answer my question.
We've not done a book on this, but it's come up many times over this last year. The problem of evil. That I think that's the toughest question for Christians to answer. I do think there's an atheist problem of evil as well, but I will acknowledge that's the tough. I think the toughest one that Christians need to look at. I was thinking about, instead of doing this book, I was halfway almost going to take Bart Ehrman's book on God's problem, which is his treatise on the problem of evil. Although we just did a Bart Ehrman book, and then one of the books you recommended also I was looking at. I just wondered if it was a little bit too deep and a lot of reading for the group, but it was a collection of essays where you had.
With me. I can show it.
Yeah, if you could do that after the club. It's a collection of essays in which you had philosophers talking about that, both Christian and I think Plantinga talks about this. And then you have atheist, agnostic philosophers also dealing with the problem of evil, but as being proof for your position, whichever your position is that proof there is no God or proof that there is a God? So that would be an excellent topic to dig into on one of our future book clubs.
Would you entertain the C.S. Lewis book on that topic?
Yeah. He goes into resolving it. Yeah, the problem of pain, is that the one you're thinking of?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
I don't think it's the best book I've read on the subject, but it does bring up all the questions for discussion.
Well, to answer Kevin's question, I also found myself, I listened to the Collins book on audiobook, and I was driving along. He was talking about the fine-tuning argument, and started wondering, could it be true after all? After all this wrangling that I've been doing for many, many years. So yeah, sometimes we atheists can wonder. I wouldn't call it. I mean, it's just a curious thing. How did that really happen? And I've wondered it before as well. Multiverse, maybe. There's no evidence for it, but either you could also say there's no evidence for God on the same terms. You'd say, well, both are explanations of what could have caused it, but neither one or the other has anything to break the tie over it. So
is it kind of like, Lord, I don't believe, help my belief? Because I know I've had the opposite feeling sometimes.
Kevin, was there one in particular? Which one did you want to hit?
I think you were talking about chapter 11.
The same one?
That's basically.
Yeah. Were you both were talking about the same chapter then?
I think so.
You're the truth seekers.
I think there are probably stronger reasons that exist, but I don't think we have.
We've read stronger books here. Yeah.
I thought it was really interesting that he considered the strongest argument of all to be the moral argument, even stronger than the fine-tuning argument, or finer than the origin of life. He skated over the origin of life as if it weren't really that much of a problem.
And the moral things outside his field of study too. That's interesting.
Does anyone not know
the? For him, so that's why
it's the strongest for me.
Which one?
One of the related
it's
questions.
One of the weekest for me. I've never considered it.
One of the related questions is interesting. In chapter 3, he talks about Immanuel Kant, who said, because he was trying really hard to just depend upon rationality and rationality alone. And he quotes him saying, "Two things fill me with constantly increasing admiration and awe. The longer and more earnestly I reflect on them, the starry heavens without and the moral law within." And we've talked about the moral law, but, a lot of people respond to the world, the beauty of the world, and they go up in the mountains, or they see something beautiful,
a frozen waterfall,
and they say there's got to be something more than what I'm seeing. There's something behind it. And I was curious if those of you who have made this kind of journey, if that stir is still there inside you. Do you ever have those times in which you see something that's amazing and go, there's got to be something more than just this thing, these molecules, these...
I saw a t-shirt once, and I ascribed to it. Technically, there's only 4 things in life that you like. Serotonin, dopamine, Really, there's only 4 things you like on this planet. Those 4 chemicals that drive your emotions.
One thing that one of the nails in the coffin of my faith, not the single one by any stretch, was one. And I realized that I've been to church all these years. I had all these kind of profound, what I thought were profound, like euphoric feelings, something beyond yourself, feelings in church. And then I realized, oh wait, I feel the same thing at concerts, and when I'm with very passionate groups of people protesting something, or that there's, I think that there is something that when you're in church you can attribute it to faith or attribute it to the Holy Spirit, that maybe it is a much more, not a mundane thing, because it's still a very powerful experience, but you can have very similar experiences in other settings. And I can see where you can be at the right moment in your life and at the right moment of weakness and look at the heavens or see something in nature and believe you found answers to your questions. I just don't know if that necessarily is the case.
Are you familiar with the concept of numinous?
Numinous, maybe not by that term.
James, familiar with what I'm talking about? Yeah, it's like Well, I think the way some people describe it is if they say, if they tell somebody there's a tiger in the next room that he might get loose, you have this fear, right? If somebody says there's a ghost in the next room, it would be a different feeling. You'd be afraid, but it would be more of this kind of a dread that would be less of a rational fear, right? But if somebody said there's a great spirit in the next room, you have this kind of awe. It's sort of like fear, it's kind of like awe. I mean, it's hard to explain, but I think we've all had that feeling. I think maybe that's the feeling you're describing. A Christian would say that's, comes from the presence of God, and there may be another atheist explanation for that as well.
Joseph Campbell, his series, that old PBS series, Power of Myth, you ever watched that or read the book? He makes a similar case about scriptures. That there are elements of myth, whether it happened or not is not even the issue, but stories, that have these themes to them that resonate with humans and cause emotional responses. And so just reading the story, whether it's Greek mythology or whether you read a Christian scripture, but that's what the argument would be. It's not because it's something supernatural, it's just that these stories with these elements in this order is going to resonate with people. And maybe it's the same thing, whether it's a concert or a worship service, there are elements that can cause an emotional response. Maybe it's not a spiritual thing you're feeling, but maybe could be explained by emotion.
Yeah, and I'll say this too, and then this goes for believers and non-believers, because just by coincidence, I was reading this book, and Collins is a very scientific-minded person, but he had this experience where he's out in nature and he sees this waterfall, and for whatever reason, it hits him in a very profound way, and
it was frozen in 3 streams like the Trinity, and that did
something like that. And it doesn't seem to make sense given how logical he is otherwise that he just accepts this experience. And I was also listening to a podcast today. Where it was a David Smalley podcast I brought up on the thread earlier, but he's an atheist and he's talking to another Christian cosmologist, and he believes in part because he had this very profound experience once again in nature, and he couldn't really explain it, but that was his area of illogic in spite of being very logical also. But I'm sure that in my own life, I have ways that I think things that don't make sense. I think that I can influence sporting events by watching them or not watching them, or cheering certain rituals.
That really does work, though.
I root for bad teams, so apparently it doesn't. The Phillies would win the World Series every year, but I think that everyone. I think this may not be brilliant insight or anything, but I think everyone has this one area of their life that maybe, while they have these general principles that they live by, there's this one special area that, for whatever reason, that's their special area, and that's where things break down, and that's where, in the right time, maybe you have these things that hit you in certain ways, and maybe you don't apply your normal thought processes to them, and that is where religion can slip in for the otherwise irreligious, or vice versa.
I think you make a great point, Chris. This is something I talk with a lot of the Christians about, something I talk with my students about, is that we have a tendency to get wrapped up in the emotion. But I don't ever want to judge the Bible to be true or false based on my emotions. I want to judge it by the evidence. And, like Aristotle said, take the evidence where it leads you. So you're, I think you're absolutely right. Now, I think if you, as a Christian, you never have any kind of, emotional experience, that would bother me a little bit. But at the same time, as a Christian, I'm not going to allow my emotions, because my emotions change, and sometimes my emotions are misdirected. And, sometimes I'm really upset about things that I shouldn't be upset about. Sometimes I'm really mad about things that I shouldn't be mad about. But it doesn't do anything to affect the truthfulness or the untruthfulness of the Word of God.
Well, it's 9 o'clock, boys and girls, so I want to thank you for being part of the Atheist Christian Book Club for the month of April. We'll be back next month, and we'll be looking at the book, the 10 Tough Problems in Christian Thought and Belief by David Madison. I want to thank, on behalf of Bill Cluck, our co-founder who couldn't be with us, I want to thank Jim Hall of Atheist Edge for sitting in.
Feels like we just got started.
Great job.
We want to plug the caterer.
Yes, and we want to say special thanks. We had a great meal. I know all of you that were watching on the live stream really enjoyed it with us. This was Terry Grigsby provided the meal for us. Terry has Terry's Tasty Temptations, I think is the name of his business. They do catering and things, and he does that as a gift to us at the book club and provides that for us. And it was definitely tasty, was it not? So,
delicious.
Anyway, he'll have something even probably better next time for us. He always outdoes himself. So thanks again, and look forward to seeing you next month.
Take care.